talking about spiritual seclusion a great deal. We spent 3 sessions together talking about that from the work of Abu al-Abbas ibn Qudama, Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. We looked at his chapter about al-uzla, or spiritual seclusion, and some of the many benefits. We discussed 6 benefits in particular to that. You were probably getting to the point of thinking that I was saying, hey, look, let's just keep this thing rolling and stay in seclusion forever, because that's what the pious seem to have felt was the best thing to do. And it very well could be for some. However, nothing is without its downfalls in this world, without its sacrifices. And so what we're going to be looking at today briefly are some of the benefits of fellowship and community life, which would be, kind of the downfalls of spiritual seclusion. So we're going to jump right in there. The Imam rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that, the intents of the world, the worldly objectives, if you will, as well as those that are religious, they basically are brought about by seeking help from others. That gives us an indication as to what we're going to be looking at. If you want to benefit from this world, or you want to benefit in terms of religious endeavor or spiritual pursuit, then typically you need help to do that. You need help from someone else, and it of course requires you to be involved with other people. There are numerous benefits here that we're going to talk about specifically when it comes to community life. And my hope is, by examining this together, when the self-quarantine, when the quarantine ends, and that may take some time, but when it does come to an end and we begin to kind of reintroduce social life and community life back into our routines, we'll have a greater appreciation for it, and we will have understood some of the benefits that we're getting from it. Sometimes when we have things at our disposal, after a while we begin to lose the appreciation for them. And so, of course, when they're taken away is when we really appreciate them. And right now, I'm sure if you're anything like me, you're really beginning to appreciate the fellowship, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the community life that we had, even though it was not too long ago. So a couple of things right off the bat, just so you'll know what we're going to be looking at. What social life and fellowship does, or the benefits that we get from that, is learning and teaching, benefiting from others and benefiting others. We get disciplining ourselves, developing ourselves, and also disciplining and developing others. We have, relationships, friendships with other people, and we are open to that. Basically, we find intimacy, social intimacy with others, and we are open to providing the same thing for other people. And then, of course, we also are rewarded for fulfilling the obligatory rights of other people, as whether they're Muslim, there are relatives, there are neighbors, non-Muslims, whatever. Everyone has rights that must be fulfilled, and by fulfilling those things, we get the reward for doing so. Also, becoming accustomed to humility, and that typically happens in social settings. We'll look at the details of that later. And then benefiting from the experiences of others and the experiences of witnessing these things unfold in front of us and learning from that. So these are just a few of the benefits that we're going to look at in greater detail when it comes to social life and fellowship. So here, let's look at the first one. The first benefit, and he mentions the first benefit because it is probably the most profound benefit, and that is learning and teaching. Learning something, if you want to learn, you have to have a teacher. It's near impossible to learn things on your own. You need, especially when it comes to religious studies, spiritual sciences, you need a teacher who's going to show you the way to knowledge, the pathway to knowledge, the correct approach. And I can speak from personal experience. Trying to learn, and everyone probably can speak on this in their own field, but trying to learn religious sciences on your own, you you don't know where to start. You don't know what curriculum to use. You don't even know what a curriculum looks like. You just start bouncing around from one subject to the next, from one book to the next. If you pick one book and stick with it and you start looking at it, you may be lost in it. You may not understand the intent of the author. You may be missing large pieces. You may not understand context. You might not understand technical terms and etc. And so you will end up wasting more of your time and becoming more frustrated than is necessary, because you can simply have a teacher who has, gone through that already and has been taught by somebody before them, who was taught by somebody before them, who eventually gets to the source knowledge of what it is that you're learning, the source of that knowledge. And so they are very intimately aware of it and familiar. And so that basically is transmitted down through this, this tradition of the master and the pupil, if you will. And so that's number one. If you want to learn, you have to have a teacher. And it should be noted that someone that needs to learn something, especially obligatory knowledge, as Muslims, there are certain things we absolutely must know. The knowledge of Islam is very vast and it's very deep. And it could take quite a long time or a lifetime to learn it all. But all of that knowledge that we have is not needed by everyone. The average Muslim does not need to delve deep into the sciences of, hadith transmission, for example, or, Quranic explanation. They don't need to dig deep and dive into all of that. They need to know how to make wudu. They need to know how to pray. They need to know how to pay zakat if they have any money. They need to know who Allah is, the very fundamentals of their faith, the basics of their iman, the basics of their worship. And so each and every one of us, if we have to learn that, then uzla, spiritual seclusion, it's not permitted for us until we're able to learn and to master the things, or at least to understand very well the things that we're obliged to know. So in this case, just getting the basics, we can't even begin to even consider spiritual seclusion taking us away from a teacher. Then obviously, if you want to teach others, then you need a student. You need somebody to teach. You can't just teach. Even I, while I'm alone here in the house, I'm always looking at who's attending and how many people are online, and is this of any benefit? And then of course, and I'm happy to see that, there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 people online. If you weren't here, then it wouldn't create the relationship that's needed to teach. I wouldn't be able to impart whatever little bit that I can. And then of course, if it's something that's recorded, then I'm looking, are people watching this? Is this benefiting anybody? So that is also one of the benefits of being involved in a community and having people around you. And so that is as it pertains to the basics of knowledge. So once you understand that, then you can consider secluding yourself for spiritual purposes. And that's what the Imam here, he says that once you've learned the basics, the obligatory knowledge, and you have come to the conclusion that you're not going to delve deep into the religious sciences, and you feel that busying yourself with worship is much better for you, then in that case, you can go and you can seclude yourself for spiritual purposes. But if you are a person that could excel in religious knowledge, then, spiritual seclusion for you, before you learn, is going to be the ultimate loss. Basically, weighing your options. What's the potential here? Do I have the potential to really, really master this? Or am I going to sacrifice that so I can go and, be alone to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I mean, both of them have their benefits, but it's somewhere down the road, one of them is going to be better than the other. It was said that al-Rabi' ibn Khuthaym, he said, first go seek knowledge, religious knowledge, and then seclude yourself, because knowledge is the foundation of the religion. He said there's no benefit in the laity performing uzla, the laity going to seclude themselves for spiritual purposes, because they would really have no idea what to go and do. He says a person that practices spiritual seclusion or uzla before they learn what is required of them, then most of the time that they spend will be wasted. You know, it will be either like sleeping. I mean, think about if you think about this time of social isolation for those of us that are home. I mean, there are some people that are still going to work. Some of us are still working online. But if you imagine those of us that are not, and we are just kind of, we have the free time. What have we been doing with the free time? We've been catching up on our sleep, watching shows, TV, entertainment. So here you can see, you know, the social or spiritual isolation, because you don't know how to benefit from the time, or you're not trained. You haven't trained the soul well enough to be able to benefit from the time that you have. Then it's not really going to be very good for you. And then, of course, you might start getting into this thought process of like, I'm going crazy. I can't handle this. So in that case, obviously, you know, you don't want to be too far gone from your community. And, you know, this is something that was repeated by many different scholars of the past about people, you know, the common Muslim, the laity, getting involved in uzla, in that, you know, it's destruction for many people. It's a hardship. It's a burden. They simply do not know what to do in that setting. So the Imam, he says, for as far as teaching, ta'aleem, there's a great deal of reward in that, as long as you have the right intention to do so, and you're intending to teach other people to propagate the religion and teach them about Allah and their duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when obviously the intention is wrong, and you're seeking a position, or you want to have increased followers, you know, if I'm like, look, I'm going to keep on doing this, I'm going to make sure I put on a big show so that my number of followers gets up into the hundreds and thousands and etc. If that's the intent behind it, simply to have the followers as like a status symbol, and not like, look, I just want to benefit as many people as I can, that's another thing altogether. Obviously, this is an evil intention, and then perhaps, you know, look, this will bring about the destruction of your own religion. So it may be better that you just head to the mountains, head to the hills, get into the caves, and just be alone. And of course, this was discussed in greater detail in one of the earlier chapters of this particular book. So the Imam, he says, most of the people, most of the teachers during our time, they have bad intentions. And so our religion requires that we remove ourselves from them. If you find a teacher of Islamic sciences that has a bad intention, then look, you don't need to be attending, you know, their lessons. He also says if there's a student who's sincere, trying to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by learning, then it's not permitted to let them stay by themselves. They need to be assisted and helped. It's not permissible to hide knowledge. If somebody is sincerely seeking it, it's not permissible to hide it from them. You know, but at the same time, you know, you can't be deceived. One of the great Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, he said that he says, "Ta'allamna al-ilm li ghayri Allah." We used to seek knowledge for other than Allah. فَأَبَى أَن يَكُونَ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. But that knowledge refused to be except for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the knowledge that he was talking about was the knowledge of the Quran, the knowledge of hadith, the understanding of the prophets' biographies and their stories, the companions, and all of these things that he was referring to. This type of knowledge is what contains exhortations, and it leads a person to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It leads them to be weary of this world. And, you know, if a person were to seek that type of knowledge and not be affected, not be impacted, then we got a problem. You know, we have a problem. And also there's other types of knowledge in Islam that don't lend themselves to that very easily, like jurisprudence, the science or the study of the do's and the don'ts. and that was very popular during the Imam's time, is that they would study fiqh, and many of them would study fiqh in order to get a position as a judge or as a mufti, someone that would issue religious edicts and things. And this would be a paying position. And so they would go about this study in order to obtain some worldly benefit. And so the Imams of the past, they were very, very vocal about the blameworthy intention behind all of this, and that it was the destruction of the faith. But rather, learning these sciences should be done sincerely for Allah in order to benefit yourself, to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to fear Allah Azza wa Jal, to fear, the things that could get in your way of salvation. And he mentions a couple of other examples, like ilm kalam, which is like theological rhetoric, and ilm khilaf, which is the study of different theological schools, etc. He says basically these things, these sciences or these topics, they don't lend themselves to, or they don't help someone along their road to the hereafter. And a person that does this, they can continuously just be, they can continuously be a transaction, of trying to make money from it or whatever. So that is number one. Number two is helping others and being helped by others. This is a benefit of community life. Being able to help others, or I should say be helped by others, is like when you need to earn a wage, when you need to go to work. If you're out there doing something, buying and selling, or you're in the service industry or something, you need customers. You need people to interact with in order to earn a wage. And if you're all by yourself, alone, in seclusion, that's not possible. But he says if you're a person that has what you need and is satisfied with whatever it is that you have, then perhaps spiritual seclusion is better for you. If you have all that you need and you're satisfied with very little, because that's essentially what it will be, unless you have you have assets already that will suffice you in your seclusion, then you don't need to go to work. And so perhaps being alone is better so that you could spend your time in Allah's worship. Also, if your intention is to go to work in order to earn a wage, that way you can spend in charity, give it in charitable contributions, then this is perhaps better than spiritual seclusion. If what your spiritual seclusion is nothing more than, performing your prayers, performing the nawafil, the voluntary prayers. Because look, sadaqah is also a voluntary act, right? Sadaqah is a voluntary act. And the nafila prayers are voluntary acts. What distinguishes the two? What distinguishes the two is the impact. If you spend your time in voluntary prayers, the impact is for you only. Whereas if you're giving sadaqah, the impact is twofold. You get the reward for giving the charity, but then you're also helping someone else by giving that money or, whatever good or service that you're giving, voluntarily. So here you could see that if that's all uzla is, or spiritual seclusion is to you, is just performing an abundance of voluntary rituals, then perhaps going out and helping other people and being charitable with your time and your skills and your wealth, and whatever that you have in your possession, voluntarily so, then that's going to be more rewarding and perhaps more virtuous than staying to yourself. Then again, if your spiritual seclusion is about, ma'rifatullah, where you are kind of living in and reflecting upon the awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is basically like the pinnacle, and this is based upon insight and religious knowledge, is a deep knowledge. If this is what it is, then uzla would be preferred here. But it has to be based on true insight and understanding, and not based on, your own delusions and imagination, a corrupt imagination of what, the awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually is. So that has to do with benefit number two, which is benefiting others and also receiving benefit from others. And the last thing we'll look at, this is number 3, and that is disciplining yourself and disciplining others. Is basically ta'deeb or adab, which a lot of the times we say it's like good manners. It's like, disciplining yourself with good manners and good character. And basically what we're talking about here, the Imam's talking about, is training the self, through the experiences of mixing with people, the experiences that you get by mixing with people. And we know that when we face hardships at the hands of others, or simply by having to deal with other people, it's a way of growth if we're reflective and we're intentional. We can grow through that and learn about ourselves and how to deal with other situations. We can struggle and strive against ourselves and how we handle hardships and difficulties and harm that we face from other people. Having to deal with other people also gives us the opportunity to become humbled, to put our ego in check a lot of times, to overcome and overpower our desires. And this is preferable to spiritual seclusion, especially for the one who's not refined, who does not have good manners. They need to go through these experiences in order to refine themselves. And this is not an exercise in and of itself, just to go through this exercise for the sake of the exercise, but rather this is a means to an end. And the Imam says, much like training an animal, that the intent is to ride the animal to get from point A to point B. You have to train the animal so that you don't get bit by it, you don't get kicked, you don't get bucked off. You train the animal to follow your command and your lead so you can get to your final destination. And that's like training the spirit, the human spirit, or the nafs, if you will, is to train that so you can get from point A to point B. Point A is this dunya, point B is the akhirah, that's your goal. It's not just an exercise done for the sake of the exercise. He says, doing that is just like training the animal, the riding animal, your entire life without never actually getting on. You never actually benefit from it, right? And so, this is one of the benefits that you can get in a social setting, is learning how to cope with these things. Basically, like, how do I cope with myself in these settings? Am I impatient? Am I quick to anger? Do I have a temper? Etc. And so going through these situations, it can help you learn how to better yourself and discipline yourself. And then obviously you'd want to share that by helping others become well-mannered and groomed and refined. Going through the things that you went through, you want to share those experiences so that they too can benefit and learn from through your example.